Greek civilization, let us quickly recap where we are on our historical journey. In February, we started with the prehistory and first forms of what we can call proto-diplomacy, which could be traced even to primates. As one of the leading global primatologists, Frank de Waal argued even chimpanzees have sense of fairness and empathy. They fought, but they often negotiated. With Homo sapiens, we got first examples of arts, technology, saved till our times in cave paintings, first tools, and emergence of spoken language. It is certain that our far predecessors managed their relation not only by fighting, but also by negotiating and reaching compromises, the core of diplomacy. That was our focus in February. Then we move in March, and we focus on early civilization of ancient East, developed in so-called fertile crescents between Nile in Egypt and Mesopotamia, between Tigre and Euphrates in nowadays Iraq. As we saw in March, early city-states, governments, and organized state structure started emerging. Writing, which emerged in Sumeria, was one of the key technologies of essential relevance for diplomacy and negotiation. And what is very important, there is a clear continuity between what started in Sumeria and Egypt and what we have today in diplomacy, from treaties and negotiations to diplomatic archives and diplomatic privileges. An important wheel on this historical conveyor belt is ancient Greece, important bridge between ancient East and modernity. Ancient Greece received tools and wisdom from the East via two main channels: from ancient Egypt and Hellenic culture, and via Persia. Greeks fought with Persians, but also they cooperated, they negotiated, they exchanged ideas. And these were two bridges, Egypt and Persia towards Greece. Let us dive deep in the era of ancient Greece, the cradle of modern civilization, which we can notice in our daily lives. In the foundation of our modern time is ancient Greek idea of rational inquiry, argumentation, and competition. In philosophy, our fundamentals could be still traced back to great Greek philosophers. As somebody said once, most of the history of philosophy is only a footnote to Plato. Or let's see modern science. Modern science owes its origins to the method of testing ideas, again developed initially by Greek philosophers and early scientists. In politics, democracy as a space for battle of ideas, exercising power, and ultimately gaining trust and support of government through voting is still as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece. Theater, geometry, astronomy, to name just a few subjects, originated in ancient Greece. And let's even get to key terms of our journey, which we are discussing: diplomacy and technology. Etymology of the word diplomacy can be traced to the ancient Greece, and the word diplo, not necessarily, it partially inspired the name of Diplo Foundation, but diplo means folded in two, and with the suffix ma, its meaning an object, the folded document granted a privilege to the bearer, often a permit to travel. Later, the term diploma was borrowed by Latin language, meaning an official document. And fast forward, in the 18th century, the French term diplomat referred to person authorized to negotiate on behalf of a state. And corps diplomatique referred to officials, of group officials involved in foreign policy. In 1796, the term diplomacy was officially introduced to English language by philosopher and political scientist Edmund Burke. This is the etymology and journey of the term diplomacy from ancient Greece till our time. Let's see about other term that we have been using in our journey, technology. Techne means art, method, tool, skill, craft. And logia means knowledge. And this is again another coin. And words that we will be using a lot: telephone, telegraph, teleworking, nowadays popular, telecommunications, have again Greek origins with the tele, far, and distance. Therefore, this interplay, this influence of the Greek culture on all parts of modern society is extremely important for understanding the current moment of development of technology, and for helping us to see how technology and diplomacy can interact in the coming time. Among historians, there is ongoing debate if ancient Greece provided us with advancement or regress in development of diplomacy. A regress or advancement comparing to earlier practices in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Persia, just to name a few. Professor Raymond Cohen, one of the leading historians of diplomacy, said at one point that the practice of Greek diplomacy was quite rudimentary compared with the, let's say, Persian cosmopolitanism. Greek diplomacy was rather provincial and unpolished. This is one of the views. Today we will unpack this notion and see where diplomacy advanced and where diplomacy retreated comparing to the previous practices. But before we dive deep into discussion on diplomacy and technology in ancient Greece, let us get a few basics of location and timeline, what we are discussing. Where is this period located? First, geographically, Greece, as you can see from the map, is located on the southeast of Europe. And the position of ancient Greece was always bridged between Asia and Europe. And it is important for overall understanding of interplay, also diplomacy and war, for example. The ancient Greek world had over 1,000 city-states, independent small states. These states were, yes, independent, but they were also interdependent, which created a fertile ground for diplomacy. Therefore, you didn't have one hegemon. In some periods, there were a few hegemons, especially like Alexander the Great, but generally it was quite a few systems. There was a very well-developed system of the balance of power, which influenced a few thinkers that we'll see later on, and even Kissinger in our era. Therefore, this is geography of ancient Greece. Let us see timeline. What were the main periods? First, we speak about period before 5th century before Christ, BC. It's also archaic period with Mykenae civilization and other early civilizations. Then we have a classical period on the 5th and 4th century BC, and Hellenic period 4th to 2nd century BC, influenced to the large extent by Alexander the Great, one of the great rulers, and creating Greek-influenced civilization outside mainland Greece, in the northern Egypt, in Asia, in all over the world. Now back to diplomacy. We can understand ancient Greek diplomacy through three personalities. I'm sure that you will come with some ideas that there are some other personalities, maybe Prometheus, but let's start with these three personalities and how do we understand them. From mythology, god Hermes, protector of traders. His task was to negotiate between warring parties and other gods, his peers. According to Harold Nicholson, English author, god Hermes had a guardianship over diplomatic representation, which had sometimes unfortunate impact on the reputation of diplomacy due to the fact that god Hermes symbolized for the ancient Greek the qualities of charm, which was positive, but also trickery and cunningness. It is certain that some of the modern suspicions about diplomacy and diplomats could be traced back to god Hermes and his not very favorable image in the, let's say, ancient public culture, if we can call it that way. Therefore, god Hermes mythology. Second important person is Demosthenes, and it is related to oratory. He was one of the first ambassadors of ancient Athens. His influence shows the importance of rhetorics in diplomacy in the ancient Greece. Sophists elevated rhetorics on the even higher level of human creativity and engagement, and rhetorics remains one of the key tools of persuasion and diplomacy till very day. And right, the last in this chosen trinity of great personality is the great author Thucydides, who can be assigned to writing. He was the first author on diplomacy. He wrote the famous history of a Peloponnesian War, one of the most detailed account of the question of power in early international relations. Thucydides is still part of basic literature for study of power, politics, and international relations. And one bridge to our time is his relevance, current relevance was basically revitalized by Kissinger's writings on the balance of power in the 19th century, and obviously the practice of power politics while Kissinger was the US State Secretary. Who were diplomats in the ancient Greece? We again find the three categories, and you can see we use the Trinity as one of the legacy of Aristotle till our time. First were proxenos. Proxenos were the resident representatives of one city-states in another, but originally citizens of the host states. They were some sort of early honorary consuls. What we have the function of honorary consuls, but more powerful than today's honorary consuls. A proxenos would use whatever influence he had in his own city to promote policies of friendship or alliance with the city he voluntarily represented. He was also expected to handle any high-level political matters that came up, as well as to provide support and housing for visitors, and in particular to merchants. You can see the line from Assyrian we discussed of important commercial aspect of representation, and proxenos was involved in supporting commercial exchanges. They had certain level of immunities, for example, asylum, in case the sending state is turned against proxenos. He had also free and safe travel during both peace and war. Proxenos held prestige, and it was hereditary function passed from the fathers to sons. And during the classical period, we have a lot of evidence that well-known Athenian politicians held one or more positions as proxenos. For example, Demosthenes was a proxenos in Athens for the city-state of Thebes. After proxenos, the second group of the diplomats or function diplomats were heralds or kerykes in the Greek. They were regarded as direct offspring of Hermes, the messengers of the god. And they were general purpose messengers and masters of ceremonies, sort of early head of protocols. Diplomatic responsibilities of heralds were to serve as a truce bearer prior to the start of the Pan-Hellenic Games, Olympic Games, to make announcements at the Pan-Hellenic Games. And they were tasked of going ahead of ambassadors in order to secure a guarantee for their safe reception, that protocol is observed, which sometimes even today is not properly done. Also, they were responsible for issuing ultimatum and declaration of war. Generally speaking, heralds were masters of protocol and ceremony, which played important role in ancient Greece. And then we have presbyes or envoys, the third category. They were senior citizens involved in advocacy, some sort of early public diplomacy. They were great orators who went for usually unpaid ad hoc missions. Delegation on envoys were often big, numbering 20, 30 people, like nowadays parliamentarians. And they were prominent representatives of sending state. What they did, in many cases, they used to address the citizens and senate of the receiving state. They had public diplomacy exercising persuasion. They tried to persuade the elite of the receiving state about position of their countries. That was a public diplomacy, some sort of early Twitter or media diplomacy that we have today. Therefore, we saw who were the main diplomats, main type of diplomatic functions. Let's see what was innovation in diplomacy. What happened, what we didn't have in the previous period in Egypt, Sumeria, and the Assyrian civilization. There was early multilateral diplomacy. It was developed around the idea of truce during Olympic Games and other common festivities, but Olympic Games were the most important. On that occasion, the representative of city-states used to gather. It was a moment where they shared some sort of a common identity. And it was a good opportunity to negotiate. And here is a link to our modern time. The idea of common peace was born, or permanent peace between the Greek city-states. With many setbacks, the idea of common peace remains claim or aspiration till our very days, with one important bridge, fortunately unsuccessful, with the League of the Nations, and our system today based on the UN Charter. One of the three pillars of the UN Charter is peace and security. Multilateral diplomacy occurred to a greater extent in the state systems, religious leagues, therefore neighboring communities sharing a deity, for example, a religious deity, and large number of military alliances, so-called leagues, established for defense and offense. One of the examples of the well-developed multilateral alliance is the Second Athenian Confederacy, a defense alliance created in 378-7, and its purpose was to guard against the growing fear that Sparta at that time would not honor the common peace of the Greek states. The founding charter, a famous decree of Aristotle, described its purpose and defense character and inviting other to join, including barbarism. And we will hear now from the Aristotle what was his message at that time, what was his decree that he sent to all of those who had the intention to oppose the power of Sparta. Aristotle is coming. We'll just wait a few seconds and we'll hear from him. If he's late, we'll continue. Let's see. Probably we'll continue and we'll hear from him later on. Okay. Another invention of the ancient Greece was cryptography or steganography. One exercise which I couldn't do because of my hairstyle. This was the message written on the bald scalp. It dates back to the 5th century BC, and steganography is one of the oldest methods of concealing secret information. According to Herodotus, it was the first used by the tyrant Histius, who shaved the head of a servant before tattooing a message on his scalp. When the hair had grown back, the servant was sent to deliver his message, and that time was a warning for the other city-state of impending attack by the presumably slow-moving Persian army. That message was relieved when the servant arrived. His head was shaved, and they basically read the tattooed message. That was one early, primitive but functional way of doing cryptography. Then there was early telegraph called Frictoria and Perseia. If you can recall configuration of the Greek land, there is variety of mountains and hills, and was convenient for conveying messages. Frictoria was a network of towers built on selected mountain hilltops, so that one tower, Victoria, would be visible to the next tower, usually approximately 25-30 kilometers away. Towers were used for the transmission of a specific prearranged messages. Flames lit on the tower, and then the next tower in succession also its flames. It was early telegraph. Later on, we'll see how Napoleonic telegraph was designed more or less along the similar line. Aeschylus, in the tragedy of Agamemnon, describes how the message for the fall of Troy arrived in Mycenae via the use of Victoria network. In the 2nd century BC, the Greek engineers, for them Cleoxenes and Democritus, invented Perseia. Pyrsos, etymology is a torch, fire. The letters of Greek alphabet were listed on a table. Each letter, as you can see on the slide, corresponds to a row and the column on the table. By using 2 groups of torches, 5 torches in every group, the left indicated the row and the right of the column of the table, they can send a message by defining a specific letter through a combination of light torches. Therefore, there was additional level of sophistication in that context. Perseia was made famous by the historian and scholar Polybius, who developed it further. This device is used for telegraphy from cryptography. By using this technique, we shared with you the Twitter riddle we ask you, can you describe number 1424353534? By using Polybius square, you can find the solution. In this case, it's the name Diplo. It just was a small test, and thank you for those of you who answered. Now back to technology. The next major invention was hydraulic telegraph. And we will see how basically hydraulic telegraph operated. Here we have, as you can see, two soldiers. They have water cylinder. They signal when they start operation, putting the water simultaneously on both sides. And cylinder, this stick in the middle of the cylinder is going simultaneously down from the as water is going out of the water cylinder. They again signal with a torch, as you will see in a few seconds. They signal when they stop water, and by having this simultaneously running, they can read predefined messages. Obviously, there is a need for a high level of synchronization between two messengers, usually staying away along the quite long distance. As you will see in a few seconds, they will signal that they stop water now, immediately. Therefore, what's happened now, they can read the message. And this is how it was, this early semaphore system was used. It was used also by Romans in the First Punic War to send a message between Sicily and Carthage when it was starting and taking off. Those were technological developments. Let us see from Katarina if there are any comments, questions so far before we move to the other aspects of diplomacy and technology in the history of ancient Greece. Katarina.
Hi, Jovan. Hi, everyone. So far, we haven't received any question. We, however, discussed the significance of writing to diplomacy, how it bridged distances, and how it remembers better than messengers. And then we talked about the creative methods of communications and agreed that they were quite fascinating. So all from my end for now. I am looking forward to your questions and comments in the chat. Back to you, Jovan.
Therefore, the importance of the writings is highlighted, and obviously in the ancient Greece, writing got to the next and the new level of sophistication. What was interesting, and what we'll see in our bridge towards the Roman Empire, and especially Byzantine time, Roman Empire increased technological side of this interplay between diplomacy and technology, reducing slightly relevance of the diplomacy or the human side of these developments. And what we have to keep in mind as we are going through the history, through this period, is this conveyor belt. What started in Sumeria, moved to the ancient, to Assyria, to ancient Egypt, and via this bridge to the Greece. We can see later on via Rome, via Byzantine, it moved to Renaissance diplomacy, and then to Europe and to our modern time. Let's see another tension that existed in ancient Greece between diplomacy and democracy. It was early tension. And this is probably the reason why Professor Cohen argues that it wasn't a glorious time of diplomacy. In Greece, there was strong focus on openness and transparency, and it is one of parallel between ancient Greece and our era. Ancient Greek diplomacy was one of the most open diplomacies ever practiced. Envoys addressed public gatherings of citizens of the receiving states, as you can see from the slide. By using the art of rhetorics, treaties and contracts were public. They were inscribed on the stones or bronze pillars, so-called stelae, located in temples or other sacred places. We should admire transparency, especially about the treaties which they had. Paradoxically, at least at first glance, the openness created one of the major weaknesses of ancient Greek diplomacy. Namely, facing the foreign public, envoys were advocating more than negotiating. This is important lesson for our time. Their task was to persuade the wide population of the receiving state not to negotiate compromise with the opposing side. Today, public diplomacy, conducted on the internet, also focuses a lot on advocacy. And we know, and history teaches us, the major diplomatic breakthroughs are usually achieved with some sort of translucent diplomacy. The public is aware the negotiation is going and they are resolved, but it does not follow the process as it unfolds. And this is usually, this transparency, not translucency, is considered one of the weaknesses of ancient diplomacy. And today, when we are discussing e-diplomacy, and very often demands for full transparency, we must always consider what is the primary purpose of diplomacy, and it is achieving peaceful solutions for conflicts through compromise. And often, it is not possible to achieve compromise while negotiating them in public eye. And that's important lesson to learn. Obviously, modern diplomacy and our era cannot and should not tolerate secret diplomacy, although it's happening, unfortunately. However, some form of translucent diplomacy should be exercised more as a way for finding compromise solution, slightly removed from the choreographed public diplomacy increasingly conducted online. This is important warning from the experience of Greek diplomacy and failures of their negotiation. We can learn that, and we can reflect. I'm sure in the chat you can reflect on this importance. Let's see what was happening in other regions. We are following, obviously, this dynamics, but we have the other regions, and in China, the Qin dynasty managed to unite most of the country for the first time after 500 years, ending so-called warring states period. Although lasting for only 15 years, the Qin dynasty managed to establish highly functional and centralized governments, develop a legal code and written language. And one of the major achievements of the Qin dynasty is that they gave the name to the country. China, for the first time, became China. After the Qin dynasty, we have the Han dynasty. They govern according to Confucius principles. And Confucius got the prominence. The Han governed for 4 centuries, consolidating unity of the country. And this can be remembered as the golden period of China. During the Han dynasty, diplomatic relations with many different Asian states were established. All of those countries received Chinese delegates at that time, representatives, ambassadors. And like today's Silk and Road Initiative, diplomacy was used to secure trade routes through so-called less civilized regions to the west. For China, obviously, those regions were civilized. And famous early Silk Road towards Europe, towards the Roman Empire, was established, as well as sea routes to India. Therefore, there is an interesting analogy with the Belt and Road Initiative of modern China. The Chinese diplomacy of that period was mainly influenced by three thinkers. Well, we are familiar with Sun Tzu and his art of war, advocating both war, but also diplomacy, smart use of force, negotiation, cultivating relations with the other actors. We already mentioned Confucius, whose ethical teaching preach for the respect of the superior states, the observance of legitimacy of authority on various levels, but also authority and the commitment in the relation with the other entity. He made distinction between cultural Chinese and barbaric foreigners. We had it also in ancient Greece, these barbarians, that was us and them dynamics, which unfortunately exist till very days today. What is important, Confucius put central law to rituals and protocol as the high level of governing, not only in diplomacy, but also in internal way of running China. We have one of early philosophers, Mencius, stated the best way for a state to exercise its influence abroad is to develop a society worthy of emulation by admiring foreigners. That was the first sort of public social engagement diplomacy. Another important part is India. In India, there was a so-called Maurya Empire, which reached its apex during the ruling of Ashoka the Great in the 3rd century BC. He ruled over most of the subcontinent, except for its southernmost part, close to Sri Lanka or Ceylon today. Ashoka was a keen Buddhist, and apart from promoting the religion in his own realm, also sent diplomatic missions to Hellenistic kingdom of Asia. Alexander the Great came close to India, and he tried to spread the Dharma, cosmic law and order, as a set of political and moral ideas. It was done also for promoting, obviously, political influence and trade. And he was the ruler who tried to overcome isolation of India. He ruled until the Rajput kingdom from the 8th century, when India, especially North India, got again isolated, and that was one of the important developments. Okay, we did this journey through history and through developments in ancient Greece, and makes 2 excursions to China and India. I will again ask Katerina to see if there are comments and questions before we move to the last, more relaxing part of our session today. We'll have some drinks. Katerina.
Yes, thank you. We have received a number of questions and comments, and there was a question regarding the hydraulic telegraph you spoke about. There was a question: what was the distance between the messengers for reading such messages, as it looks logistically complicated? And then there was a question for you: have you tested any of these methods of communication? Then Deirdre, she referred to some of the modern uses of fire signals, the Martello Towers on the south coast of England, early 19th century, set up when there was a threat of invasions by Napoleon. And then Ronald noted that some people claim that in fact we don't live in a democracy, that we are actually in a republic, and even that is stated in the USA Constitution. It was said that a true democracy would lead to anarchy, and as true democracy required that everybody participates. And is that logic correct? And then the discussion has just unfolded, and I will follow it more closely from now on.
Well, for the hydraulic telegraph, it was hydraulic in the function, but the key element is the visual visibility of the fire of torches, because they had to signal when they basically open the wallet and then when they close it. Therefore, visual which is approximately 20 to 30 kilometers. And in ancient Greece, it was relatively easy because of many mountains, and it was possible to do it. Have I tried any of these methods? No, some of them I cannot use because of my scalp and the hairstyle. The other I plan to use, and that's definitely will be an interesting exercise. And the question of democracy and republic or res public or public affairs is an interesting one, and this is ongoing debate from Plato, from his argument in the Republic that rulers or philosophers should rule society. He wasn't very enthusiastic about democracy, much less than Aristotle and much less than Pericles and people in the ancient Athens, which practiced probably the most developed form of democracy. Later on, founding father of the United States, Madison, Hamilton, and others were inspired by this debate and this dilemma: to what extent that democracy could lead into anarchy. And we have that discussion up until our very days. We have elements, very successful elements of direct democracy here in Switzerland, but there are also more and more examples of limits of democracy or manipulation of democracy if it is only reduced to the elections. Therefore, we should undust some of the writings from definitely Plato, but also Aristotle and other post-Platonic thinkers on the question of the human nature, democracy, and what we as organized humans in res publics, in republic, can do in order to maximize freedoms, human well-being, and possibilities for peace. And that formula, we are still searching as humans, as a society, for this formula. Thanks for excellent question. Now we're going to close it with our small drinking rituals. As you can see, I have a red wine here, and I have some water. And I'm sure that my French and Italian friends will be horrified when I start mixing water with wine. And it was the typical way how in ancient Greece they prepare wine. They diluted wine. One argument is that they didn't pour water into wine. They basically did the other way around. They wanted to purify water by putting some wine and alcohol in it. But wine was divine in ancient Greece, according to mythology that came to our time. Wine was invented, in inverted commas, although it existed in Mesopotamia, as we discussed last week, by Dionysius, and he was father of the wine industry and father of enjoyment and indulgence in wine and other aspects of life. The Greeks became passionate wine drinkers, and there was art of drinking wine. Let me start. I don't know, I have to read more carefully. If you first pour wine or water, but let me start with wine. And there was a drinking wine centered mainly around so-called symposium gatherings of adult males, ranging from the different functions, from simple socializing to more wild parties. But one important part was that it was a time and place and space for philosophical discussions. And the key in the writings which you can get today is to find the right balance by becoming a bit drunk, not too much, but also remaining sober for engaging discussion on philosophy. And we have a few major books. One of them is by Plato on Symposium, and issues and ideas that were discussed during this party. There are various theories that there should be 1/4, 1/3, 1/8 of water in wine. I will put just a bit. Let me just taste for you. The smell and bouquet is basically diluted, but great cheers from Geneva and from this journey to ancient Greece. Cheers, have a nice day. When you take next time probably not diluted wine, think about what we can learn from ancient Greece and all ancient civilization. We can learn a lot. Once more, cheers. Oh, it was not bad. Okay, that was all for today. If you don't have any, Katarina, questions and comments, we are closing today's session. You will receive in the follow-up some notions about the right ratio. For example, Odyssey argued that you should have 20 parts of water to 1 part of wine, which was very, very diluted. Katarina, over to you.
We haven't received any question, but some people actually did not agree with what you just did. But yeah.
I guess they're definitely French. French is horrified with this practice. I think people from the Balkans, from Dalmatia, they may sometimes dilute, although more with white wine and sparkling water, and from Germany. But well, we'll send definitely message to ancient Greece that it was not proper practice, and that next time they should revisit it. Next month, we are going to move to Rome, and in particular, Byzantine diplomacy and Byzantine civilization as one of the most advanced form of diplomacy. Stay tuned. Have a nice spring. Try to find the time to relax with real wine, with beer, with diluted wine, with Coke, with coffee, whatever is the practice and your preference. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at the end of the month of May for Rome and Byzantine diplomacy. Bye-bye.
We shall bring you further news as quickly as we